Hello and welcome to another Razorwire podcast. Today we're going to be talking about biometrics, data protection around biometrics, the ethics of biometrics and all things biometrics, a very controversial subject over the years for many. I've got two specialists in the security space who love biometrics, so this should be an interesting period of time for us to be talking about something that maybe could alleviate some of your concerns, or at least maybe make you rethink, the validity of biometrics within your organisation. Maybe for one way, maybe for the other. Let's find out. So, I have Chris Dawson. Chris, do you want to kind of introduce yourself to those listening out there?
Sure. Thanks very much, James. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Dawson. I'm a former Royal Marine and private security consultant, just over 2 decades from start off from school, really. Since leaving the Marines in 2012, I've had a number of roles which would require a slightly different level of physical security, from hostile all the way up to more recent times in the corporate world, where I've focused my energy into protecting employees, assets, and the business as a whole.
Fantastic. Iain is a former consultant of Razorthorn. I will introduce him as that. Iain, do you want to kind of tell the team out there who you are, what your background is?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Iain. I'm a former Royal Air Force intelligence specialist, but then obviously in 2015 jumped ship to the civilian sector, as James has already alluded to. I was a Razorthorn, or a Thorn, as he likes to call it.
Yeah.
But I'm mainly operate in the cybersecurity, data protection, and now risk management framework. So various sectors I've worked in the previous, with work with James as well, in public and private, be it from financial to software development, quite a few of those, if I can't remember back in the days. But yeah, so that's my background, but heavily focusing on data protection. And
so we've definitely got the right people in the room here then. Brilliant. Fantastic. So let's talk very briefly about the history of biometrics. Biometrics actually goes back a hell of a lot further than a lot of people think. Back in the 70s and 60s and 70s, if you were a big sci-fi buff, there'd be all kinds of biometrics around there, and the idea that you could scan your hand, scan your eyeballs, scan random parts of your body to access areas within usually a spaceship or some kind of base or something, which everybody back in the day, maybe used to laugh at and think, that sounds lovely, but I don't think that technology is gonna happen at all. And then boom, we hit the 90s, and the very early forms of commercial biometrics started coming out. Usually kind of things that you connected into your desktop on a scanner that you would scan your thumb on. And I remember the really early ones where you could kind of defeat those with I think it was a jelly baby, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You could,
Most definitely.
if somebody had used it before, you used to get a jelly baby, flatten it out and get rid of some of the powder, and then you could it would react with the oils from the previous fingerprint and then get you through. And the false positive rate on those devices was terrible back in the day. You had to constantly clean them and so on and so forth. And there's been lots of different iterations of biometrics. And in 25 years that I've been in this game, I've seen a lot of kind of almost little resurgences of biometrics over the years, where firms have tried to incorporate them into laptops, which is actually quite prevalent now. Some people liked it, some people didn't, and then it would disappear again. And then when mobile phones started to get a bit more complicated, all of a sudden we started using biometrics there, originally with the thumb scanners on the little buttons if you were an iPhone user or whatever. Now coming to kind of like facial recognition. And as I've said, there's been lots of different iterations. But I think in many of those iterations, the subject matter of data protection and the protection of that biometric data for individuals, and how important it is, whether or not it's at risk, whose responsibility is it to keep it secure? What happens if it goes awry? Are there instances where it has gone awry? And I think that, the controversy behind a lot of that has really kind of meant that biometrics has been adopted a hell of a lot later than feasibly it should have. I've always considered it to be a pretty good, viable second factor in a multi-factor authentication method of entry or access to systems or services. It's better than a tag because you can lose a tag, it can get wet, you can have it stolen or whatever. The stupid little calculator things that were great until the battery died, and then of course you had to go and get another one, and each one of those was, back in the day, the old RSA ones, like 25 quid a token, and if you had a decent size user base, 25 quid a token could actually turn out to be quite a significant amount. And obviously you always had to have like stacks and stacks of spare ones just in case one went and smashed or broke or got wet or whatever. So bearing in mind that you guys are from a military background and may have seen a bit more of a wider adoption of the early days of biometrics, obviously don't say anything that you're not allowed to, because I do appreciate in some instances you might not be able to say. But could you give us a bit of background as to your first interactions with it, how it was kind of used and viewed by those types of institutions when you first got in? Should we start with Chris or Iain? Who wants to step up?
I'll speak on that. I think for me, coming from the naval background, obviously the military is very, very probably behind anything that comes out commercially. So if was in the military, especially when facial recognition first brought its vendor test in 2000, I think it was, and then they used it at a Super Bowl in 2001, if I remember, and it just went massively haywire. They used it for instead of actual physical tickets, people would try and upload the facial features, and that would be your ticket. But we just didn't have the technology to be able to put that into practice. So I think for us would mainly be in an armory setting, in the military, would be where you held where the things that go bang are held. It is more than essential. Yes, everyone probably most times would revert back to lock and key because of the glitches in the system. So I think when it was introduced, especially for us, definitely later than 2000s, I'm probably talking 2009, 2010, before they started to use it. And obviously the technology was better, but as the military does, it buys the cheapest it can, which is probably the initial technology we used, and it didn't work at all. So again, full circle back to lock and key for that.
I suppose also in a military setting, you can only have it in certain locations, because on certain operational bases or whatever, I know Iain sort of had his time out on some of those. The dust, the rubbish, the crap in the air, the stuff that's covering you, the engine oil, the grease, the general kind of, you can't get off operation, but you're crawling around in the middle of nowhere, scraping your hands to bits, for instance, if it's, fingerprint sort of biometrics, and not expect some false positives to occur or not expect some failures to authenticate, even with a legitimate handprint. I've done it myself with my laptop. I cut my thumb badly, didn't think, went to try it, and I was like, why can't I get in? And then I had to bypass and use another factor. But, Iain, what's your initiation into biometrics?
It was actually cat piracy. Way back when, Somalia piracy. So my first hand was working with the obviously it was a policing mission rather than a military mission. So when they used to capture the pirate attack groups, they used to do the biometrics, the retina scans, the fingerprints, and all that. That was the first time I really actually actively used it, and obviously huge database that they're using there to then go, I got mates, we've caught you before, what are you doing? Type thing. Oh, off you go, type thing. So yeah, that was a massive use, and we'll go into the ethics of that about but the data that they were consuming on that, because you're looking at how many packs you could get a day per action groups. It could be 2 or 3 a day with 6 or 7 people on that, and especially in piracy season, as they like to call it, i.e., not monsoon season. We used to get them quite a lot down the IRTC, which is the Northern Cape, essentially, as you come out the Suez Canal. You used to get them just zipping across up to Yemen from the north, Somalia. You just pick loads up, and you just zap them, put them in a database, and then you let the police forces deal with them and move on. But we use that from an intelligence setting to go, well, actually, they're linked to that, and you build up a picture as well.
Well, this is it. I mean, because biometrics is used now really extensively with things like CCTV.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about the retinal scans and the fingerprint scans, although that's kind of where originally a lot of that technology came from. I know in certain parts of the world that begin with a C that will remain nameless, they've got quite extensive facial recognition, gait recognition, which is, the way that you walk. It's kind of exploded, and along with that, a lot of people are seemingly asking the question, well, first of all, where is this being stored? Second of all, what are you storing? If you're storing multiple different types of biometrics, is it just my face? Is it just, the way that I walk? Is it both of those things tied into a database? How secure is that database? What else do you use that information for? Because I think a lot of people, when it comes to biometrics, they seem to they consider it their property, and they're right in many respects. It's a bioprint of them in some form or another. But they have no say how it's dealt with and how long it's kept for. Because, we've all heard governments say, we only hold it for a certain amount of time. Come on, we're not all stupid,
I think Edward Snowden proved that theory wrong.
Well, absolutely. Love him or hate him, he did point out some rather significant issues that were occurring, and it just kind of goes to show, what is being stored, what is being, because in the early days of biometrics, a lot of these biometric prints, let's call them that, they were quite extensive. They were quite large, chunky bits of data. They weren't small. And when you think about the amount of storage we had back then available to us and the technology we had available to us, it was very limited in many respects compared to the data set. So if you tried to do this in some large scale, you would have to be either a very large organization to do it, or you'd have to be some kind of government body with very deep pockets, or government organization. But that's changed now, hasn't it? It's a lot lighter now. It's a lot easier to store.
Yeah, I think so. Just to jump on the back of what Iain said, with the pirates in Somalia and the whatnot, taking that biometric data, that again was probably used on the back of the major test in Afghanistan. In the Helmand province in Afghanistan, like you say, Iain was, they were probably doing 2 or 3 people a day, where most patrols, and you've got 100 patrols all going out from different locations pretty much all at once. They were taking biometrics for villages, for whole villages, thousands and thousands of people daily, from children all up to the village elder. Was that
forcefully, or was that by agreement?
That
or is that a secret?
Depends which side of the fence you sit on, I think. And the cover that not the cover, but the reasoning behind that was probably was pushed to, let's get a database of how many people we've got in said village, for instance, and then we can look after them. We can build schools and hospitals, and we know what the population is, and we know we have more information about them. But let's be honest, it's for everything. So and like you say, that data that was pulled was ridiculous. I remember the little biometric. I can't remember what the name of it was actually, but the little camera that they use that So they took a picture, so they took your facial recognition, they did your iris, and it could also take your fingerprint and thumbprint all in one hit. You could probably get about 100, 150 people's data on there. And then it was, okay, we've got to patrol back to the forebar, to where you are, to empty the mobile and then go back out again, because it just wasn't large enough unless you're carrying a desktop around on your back.
Or a couple of devices in your backpack.
Yeah. Actually,
that would be clever.
Following on from that, I think it was last month, one turned up on eBay. One of those devices from a US wholesale, and it had all the data still on from Afghanistan. And the person who bought it kind of flagged it to the US authorities. They went, "Oh,
what, via the media?"
Pretty much, yeah. It's been in the news, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think so. That being a platform for the world to see, because obviously when that was happening, and then when that information coming out, it was probably around the time of Snowden, and what the US and what the UK and all the other governments were doing and probably still are doing, but it's a bit more ethical now. That platform just said, right, this is what they've got and this is how they're doing it. No one really cared before that. So that pushed it out there. And then, so, if you had biometrics on your mobile phone, for instance, no one really bothered about, it's just your fingerprint. It's just stored on your phone.
Yeah.
But after something like so big come out, people really started to look and go, oh, actually, is it just on my phone? Do Apple or do they take that information? Do they see if I've been here, there, and everywhere? And I think that's where the ethics bit comes into it, and push a bit more on GDPR and how it's great. I mean, I'm the other way. Take as much data as you want. Let's know where everybody is and what they're doing at every single minute of the day.
No, thanks.
And there's a whole other podcast involved in that one. We'll definitely have to think about that one. I think, you're absolutely right. And one of the things I suppose when you really look at it in the cold light of day, we've had kind of biometrics slowly pushed to us through devices that we love and have on us all the time. And people don't think about, because when you do the whole kind of, I've got my new device, I've got to do my fingerprint, and you sit there and you roll it around on the pad for like 10 minutes, and then finger 2, and then, do all your digits if you really want to. Nobody really thinks about where that information is stored. I think a lot of them assume that it's stored on the local device. But that's not always the case, though, is it? Because those devices are backed up quite commonly, depending upon which, model you have or flavor that you have, be it, Android or be it Apple. It is uploaded to that location. So there's no reason why that biometric information in that device can't be linked back to specific pictures that have also been backed up, and so on and so forth. So, getting hold of that information, you could, in essence, pretty much steal someone's entire identity just through their biometrics. I mean, has that happened yet? Have you seen any instances of that? Is that something on the radar for a lot of these companies?
It's not a case of it being stolen, but a case of it being misidentification, where that has happened. I think there's a case in the US recently where a man was arrested because he had been accused of, facial recognition had picked up and said, that's your man, who arrested a store in Louisville that he'd never been to before, and was promptly arrested and said, we've got facial recognition, it's fine, it's you. And it's all because he had a mole.
I mean, in a world where we could now create deep fakes of people pretty much saying or doing anything, if we were to get the biometric print, so to speak, the facial sort of like biometric print of somebody, and then use that to overlay on a deep fake video, the potential damage, reputational damage, personal damage in some cases on that kind of attack. And we can't be stupid enough to think that people haven't considered it before, because let's face it, in a world of, in the world that we're in, it's getting more and more difficult these days to to go anywhere without getting seen. And just the implications behind a lot of this, even down to the extent of deep fakes on a high definition imaging device being used to get past cheap biometric facial recognition. I mean, where do we go with this?
And I think that's one of the problems as well, is you have a basic technology, and this is what we want to do. We want to have facial recognition, or even more basic on voice recognition. I mean, the technology on voice recognition is there. Everybody uses it every day with Siri, Alexa, Google Dots, and whatnot. You speak, it answers you. But anybody can speak. So it's not after your voice, and we can't hone it into somebody's voice. So therefore, that doesn't really work. The Born Identity, where he records him and then opens a safe, that in the real world that doesn't work. But the basics of that is there. If you've got a very, very basic system, we can use a photo. If we've got facial recognition for Iain, and I use a photo of Iain, it will probably pick it up. Unless it does, unless we're talking about the super technology that we've got, where it's looking deep as a 3D image of you and the whatnot. But yeah, we can use photos. And then what happens there? Where if someone has an accident, a cut on their eye, does it pick up that? How does that work? We use them every single day. Heathrow uses it 25,000 times a day through passport control.
Iain, you look like you wanted to say something there.
So, take technology out of it. You've got voice. It's biometrics. Your voice patterns and everything. That is part of your biometric code. That can be turned on its head. Your deepfakes, going back into that. Using that voice to just phone up a help desk to say, hey, it's the CEO of Microsoft or wherever, I'm locked out. Can you let me in? And you're phoning Bob on the help desk. Hopefully they've been trained to recognize and understand that these types of attacks exist. But using that, you don't even need the fancy equipment or anything like that. You've just against the person attack, which is always obviously the biggest risk factor in most of it and everything, is the person at the end of the day.
I suppose also, I mean, thinking about it as an information security professional, just chucking out random things that come into my head, which tends to happen a lot, as Iain will probably tell you a lot out there. I mean, with technology now, I mean, voice modulation for for streamers and Twitchers and gamers and whatnot has been out for a long, long time. And there's no reason why somebody can't come up with a program that analyzes a voice modulation from a biometric print, a vocal recording of somebody, and with enough, because it's like when you train Windows to recognize your voice. I've done it, for voice control on certain games and stuff like that. With enough of enough words being spoken, there's no reason why a program can't completely rebuild a voice modulator around the inflections and the way that you speak, and then utilize that for that same purpose. Is that the next level of social attacks that we're going to experience? I mean, we can't be the first people to come up with something like that.
No. Those attacks have been seen in the wild. Just putting it out there, Jim. You do these podcasts.
Well, exactly.
You're giving them the ammo.
I am, but so are you, and so's Chris. So there we go.
No one will ever get this northernness down, I'll tell you.
No, but I mean, it is a concern. It's like, I think in many respects, the question then becomes, sort of drawing it back to the data protection. If you are using biometrics, you do have to put a higher level of security against that biometrics than what you're using the biometrics for in itself. In many respects, it's a bit like encryption. The keys you use to, for the key encrypting keys, has to be better than the normal set of keys. It's the same principle, and it's like, programmatic access for applications through relevant APIs and what have you, to be able to access that information, but without leaking it out, has now become quite a key thing. You know, the storage of vast quantities of biometric data is one tough thing to deal with in the best of times. Now you're having to deal with the wholesale security of that information. As we well know, you know, when you encrypt a data set, it does add more data to that data set to do that encryption and to you know, perform that function. So you're only making your data sets bigger and worse to store and manage, you know, especially from and back up as well, because don't forget, corruption is a thing on some of these platforms. So, I mean, where do we go with this? So is biometrics in many respects still in its infancy, and we need to do some serious work on it?
I think yes. From
there you go. Iain jumps in.
From a legal and ethical consideration, there's not enough.
I think Iain jumped
guidance out there for this. Sorry,
I said Iain jumped in because he knew what was coming.
I know, but
which is interesting because we've got two flip sides of the coin here. We've got one person concerned about, you know, the ethics behind it and protecting that, and then we have somebody else who's like, no, we need to prevent crime. I suppose we need to gather as much as possible, and if there's nothing for you to fear, then there's nothing for you to fear. But go on, Iain. Sorry, I jumped in.
No, it's all right. Yeah, there needs to be more legal and ethical. I mean, even the biometrics surveillance commissioner, the ICO's one, even wrote to the ICO about it and said, look, I think it was October last year, that look, there needs to be more done on this. There's not enough considerations for that, including the societal issues, I think it was as well, to consider this. There needs to be a framework in place. And what's been written like that is already behind, like way behind from what we've got. I mean, take Clearview, you know, that weird Clearview at IA, they've been fined, 20 million by the Greek data protection and then France and then UK as well. They just hoovered up all the data they could and then sold it on to say, yeah, this is a facial profile of me, you know, and that in itself is like, I don't want that. I'm not a big fan of social media. I don't want my face plastered everywhere. You know, I'm quite private as a person. I don't want that. That's my basic right, isn't it?
But that's the big question, though, isn't it? And I know it's been bandying back and forth, and we'll go over to Chris in a minute because I know he's eager to jump in here. But who owns who owns that image of you? Who owns that representation of you? That biometric print that we keep talking about. It doesn't matter whether it's vocal. You know, your face, your eyes, your fingerprints, your footprints, the way that you walk. Is it you that owns that? I mean, technically speaking, yeah, it is because it's you. But when it's gathered and harnessed by an organisation, be it public or be it private, does it then become them? Who's the data owner? You know, and this is where things I think get a bit muddy.
They do become the data control. I'll give you that. Of that data, and they have their responsibility.
Because you own your face.
Yeah, I own me. At the end of the day, the wife will tell you different. But, but I own everything about me, and I am no model, so I'm not signing my rights away to say, yeah, plus my face everywhere. Quite surprised Chris didn't jump in there. But
he will in a minute. He will in a minute.
But and if I'm willing to give someone, i.e. the business that I work for, my image, say, yeah, that's me, that's my identification, great. I expect you to inform me and tell me how you're looking after that and how long you're going to retain that for and what controls have you got in place. I'm happy with that, but just to take it willy-nilly, so to speak, no. It just riles against my privacy. You know.
But isn't it different from the people who you work for, because you have a measure of control there? When it's the government, you don't. And it's just like anything. It's like people selling in many respects, people selling your email address to spammers, you know.
Yeah.
You don't, it's yours. Technically, you own that email or the organisation that you bought it off, you know, because you're an organisation, or if you've got it yourself, technically you have that email address. But it's not yours anymore. That's it. It's out there now. You're going to be spammed to hell. I mean, we all experience that horror, no matter who you are. But let's go over to Chris, because I could see him really gritting his teeth. Come on, Chris, tell us your view.
I think what riles me up a little bit is that people just pick and choose when they want to jump on the bandwagon and saying I like my privacy laws and it's my data, blah 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 blah. But then we'll walk around with the latest smartphone with facial recognition in a pocket that's got geolocations, and it's not just facial recognition to open your phone, which, let's say, Apple, Samsung, other providers, whatever, are available. It's not just them that hold that on the. Okay, so to unlock your phone or your device, let's say that biometrics sits on that device. Fine, okay, done. I use my face recognition to open my bank. That doesn't sit on the device, because how does that sits with the bank? I use my face to open various apps. How many people will actually go through all the terms and conditions to make sure that they won't? You'll just sign up to it. You're doing this. But when the Metropolitan Police put out the facial recognition testing that was just taking everyone's face, and the uproar was like, well, but we're utilising this data to make sure everybody's safe. If there's an incident, we'll look at that. And then it's like, well, we can't do that. But people will quite happily walk around with a big, massive sign on their back, which is in their pocket, saying, here I am, this is me, this is where I am, and this is what I'm doing.
I agree. I mean, and there's two things there, really. I mean, one, you've given permission in many respects by the contract that you've signed for somebody to harvest that information. There is a massive inference on how whether or not they're going to pick up on how companies. I think companies should be taken to task. I think my personal opinion on this, for an organisation outside government, that's another thing entirely. I'll go into that in a minute. I think, you should sign up for some form of standard. This is where I think compliance really helps. Some kind of standard where you say, we will comply with this standard when it comes to managing and protecting the biometric information that we hold on anyone, and then they're held to account on that. They're tested on it. They're audited against it, be it, regularly, or be it, surprise audits or whatever it is, because it's only getting worse. More and more things are being used, for biometrics. We don't know where that data is half the time. And I think that's where the public have the problem. Now, when it comes to government, I think, I see the point of what governments say when they say, look, we'll use, if you've got nothing to fear, if you've done nothing wrong, we're just doing this so we can track known terrorists, or we can track incidents and who was there, so we can contact them for information and so on and so forth. Or, basically, if you're not a criminal, you don't have to worry. But I think there's a massive distrust there. That's where the distrust for how their data is being protected comes in some respects, and how it's being used. Nobody wants to be on a police database ever, whether you're a criminal, whether you're not. You don't want to be on some database somewhere. B, as you just alluded to, and it's not just the military that buy the cheapest possible technology, our beautiful governments around the world, God bless you if any of you are listening to this, because we love you. Just thought I'd put that out there. None of them are well known for actually spending vast quantities of money on a product that actually does what it's meant to do. Oh, here we go. Iain's.
I have to say, they will spend the vast monies on technology, but it won't do what they.
See, this is one of the signature things that I see with security a lot. A lot of people, they look to buy the cheapest option. And as I say to a lot of people, cheap is good, cheap is fantastic, and I had this drilled into me when I was years ago in IT. And Ian's heard me say this before, actually. I can see it's twigging in his brain. You can either have it fast, you can have it good, or you can have it cheap. But you can only pick two of those. If you want it fast and good, it's not going to be cheap. If you want it cheap and fast, it's not going to be any good. and so on and so forth, and we have to get out of that mentality with certain technologies that we are developing. Everything's going as a service. Good example. I mean, biometrics is a tough subject matter to discuss. The as a service industries that we are going into now, where risk is handled by this company, IT is handled by this company, your HR records are handled by this company. The amount of third parties people have now are just getting insane. And we're seeing a lot more business in people asking for third-party risk assessment. Now, if there's multiple forms of biometrics being held at lots of different levels to authenticate at lots of different locations, how are we sure that that is being secure, and how are we sure that's not being sold on? I mean, the danger, as Iain said earlier on, is, people have already been caught selling it on. What do we do? Do we have a central, maybe the answer is a central biometric repository, and anybody wanting to validate anybody's, bioprint goes to the, utilizes that facility, and it's kept uber secure and all the rest of it. Maybe that's I don't know. What do you think?
I think that would probably fall down.
There's a business idea right there.
Yeah, I think it'd be so difficult to manage because there'd be so much data. And again, that would be one point. It would be a single point of failure if it was all in sort of one place, or even multiple places, but all linked to one portal, for instance. But I think
hopefully they'll have a CISO that will prevent that.
If we look at if we just look at like on an office level, like what I deal with, just introduce it so we've got access cards so we can gain entry. If we want to up that level into a two-factor, okay, we can put a access card and a PIN code on there. If we want to go multi-factor, okay, we'll do access card, PIN code, and a fingerprint just to open the door. And then the next level in that is facial recognition CCTV. Now that's not. I mean, yes, it is. It's recording. It's storing your data. Hopefully, it's in an enclosed loop because the company can control it, and that's where Iain and his team would probably come in and make sure it's all being ethically controlled and stored and then deleted when it's not needed, blah, blah, blah. But that facial recognition, if someone was to go into that room that's not been pre-programmed and they've managed to steal James's card and chop your thumb off, that can flag up. We've got so many levels that we can do, but it's so difficult to get that into a commercial place because of the ethics around it. And I sort of get it, but when people walking around with their ethics, with their biometrics sat in their pocket, it just riles me a little bit.
Doesn't it? I mean, and to be totally honest, I mean, going back to, weirdly enough, something we were talking about just before we got on and started recording, doesn't that lead to people then wedging open doors, because they can't be bothered to go through the 500 factors to go through? It's like, it's one of these things, isn't it? There's always situations where you get too much security, where you make it so bloody difficult for people to do what it is they need to do, even getting around a building, let alone with fire concerns and all the rest of it. What happens if they're locked in the room and all of a sudden, a fire alarm goes off? Do all the doors automatically open? That then leads people into attacking the fire system if they want to get at the crown jewels, because they know that it disables all the locking systems. This is what I love about security, the balance and the dance that we have to play amongst the various different scenarios. But
the biometric technology can be utilized in so many different ways. It doesn't have to just be to catch people doing something wrong. If if we look at like something like JP Morgan, absolutely ginormous building, thousands of people in there daily, in and out. They have 360-degree CCTV coverage that has facial recognition technology in there. If there's a fire, if there's something and the building's been evacuated, you could literally ask that you could ask that CCTV system to bring up that person that is unconscious in a server room on the 70th floor that no one can see. We could utilize it for that. And in that way, everyone would be absolutely fine with that when it's bad. But when it's just running normally in the background, people go, oh, I don't know what we're doing with all that data. But as soon as something goes wrong, why have we not got that? How can we, why can't we use it for this? Well, we can, but you said no to it when we wanted to install it.
Well, now we're in trouble. Ian's going to say something.
No, I think you've kind of hit the nail. Purpose. Which purpose?
An agreement.
As long as you're upfront, honest. Thank you. Yeah, the purpose. As long as you're upfront and you're honest about, yes, this is why we're using it. This is what we intend to do with it. If you go out of those bounds, that's where you get people going, oh, I don't like that. Because historically, let's be honest, we have organizations and companies that have gone out of those bounds that said we're collecting it for this, and then we go, it's about trust at the end of the day and the purpose of what you stick to that, you'll be golden, so to speak, in my eyes. But if you go out of those bounds, if you go out of those bounds, you kind of, you've crossed the line, you know.
So what happens then on let's take the Met Police when they put the facial recognition out in the middle of the town, and it was a test to see what kind of data it took, how easy it was to deploy, blah 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 blah. Okay, so they're doing that test. They're not looking at anyone in particular, any individuals, and an incident happens. Can they, from that? So they've not said we're looking at any incidents. We're not using this right now to fight crime, or we're literally just testing it. And a crime happens, and they're looking at it going, what do we do there?
Do you know how they counteract that? They put big signs up that say, police live facial recognition in use. They put a privacy notice up, essentially, that says, this is what we're using it for.
But on the other side, you know, just adding fuel to this particular fire, not that I like watching this kick off. You know, what about people who have a vested interest and, you know, in anonymity? You know, like, for instance, people who are in witness protection, you know, vulnerable individuals who, you know, we have this that crops up quite often. You know, it's like, well, if you're in witness protection, you know, you're not going to start going around places where there's CCTV, but then there's a hell of a lot of CCTV around here, and the security of those CCTV controls, let's face it, if you go to, and for any local police institutions watching this, you know, let's be honest, look objectively at the security of your infrastructure and your solutions and the databases that you have where you're holding this kind of information. Can you honestly say it's about as secure as it feasibly can be? It's been tested to be secure, and there's very little chance. I mean, there's always a chance someone's going to get in. We're all security professionals. We're not idiots. But at the same time, you know, the level of security you would have to put in for the assurance to allow people to feel assured that if they are on witness protection or they are vulnerable, you know, children or adults, and the whole children thing is the other thing as well, that it's not being misused, is again really, really expensive. It's really tough to do. And there's the other things like, what about on beaches? What about in, you know, dressing rooms? You know, there was that whole big controversy. Do you remember the airport scanners where people were being sort of scanned? They both held their hands up. We've all probably been through it by now. Yeah. But it you know, it shows you, it's in essence really nude without your clothes on. It shows what's underneath your clothes, and people were losing their minds over whether or not it was showing bits of their anatomy that they didn't want images of. And that, you know, was that then being sold off? Was that then being, you know, oh, look at this is a really good looking guy or a girl. I'll just take a picture of that with my phone and then send it to my mate, who then sends it to his friend, who, you know, this is how things get viral. I mean, where do we end with this? You know, we're talking about biometrics, and it sounds like we probably need to go into a second podcast rediscovering biometrics. I think we'll have to term it as. But we're reaching the top of the time. So it's kind of final thoughts on the subject matter, really. I mean, from my perspective, biometrics, I've always loved biometrics for many reasons. I think as a security person looking at it purely from a security standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. It's a very good factor to validating access to data, to a location, wherever it may well be. But it comes at a bit of a cost. And I'm going to be an annoying sit on the line between what Chris is saying, what Iain's saying, because that's my privilege. And the other reason is, I can see it from both sides of the fence. I hate the thought of my children having, being on CCTV when we go to the swimming pool, I understand why it's there, and I understand why it needs to be on the outside of the building. I understand why it possibly needs to be centered on the pool, just in case something happens and one of them slips or hits the head or whatever. But, where do we go with this? And I think, I'm not normally a big believer in really strict compliance, but I think when it comes to this kind of thing, I think this is probably where we do need it. We have strict compliance in the way that we operate and use money. We have strict compliance in the way that we handle certain types of data, depending upon what type of data you're processing or you're looking after or you're generating. Why don't we have something similar for biometrics, recognized in the Western world, maybe not even, something in ISO, maybe. I know PCI they're talking about that kind of information as well, because obviously credit cards and access to credit card information. But those are my thoughts. I think it's great. I think it's a way to go. I think we need to put in some standards and to hold organizations wanting to do biometrics, especially on wholesale. Maybe it's slightly different if it's just their staff to get them in or pick up anybody robbing the place. But if it's going to be a public location, not like the company foyer, look at it this way. If you're going into the company foyer and you own the building, or there's a couple of companies in the building, you're either visiting or you're robbing it, or you work there. As simple as that. But I'm gonna stop now because I'm gonna cough. Who's next? Who wants to give me their final thoughts? It's going to be a fight between Chris and Iain.
No.
Looks like Chris has won.
2 seconds for me. I think I agree. Obviously, I would push biometrics to be everywhere to keep us safe, secure, and even from a health and safety issue. If something happens and no one's got eyes on it, it's great to have that technology, and we could utilize that. And I'm just happy that I got Iain to agree, which I'm glad it was recorded.
With caveats. For me, it is literally down to, especially businesses and stuff, what is the purpose of being transparent at the end of the day, and how you're securing that and ensuring that data is secured, because it is special category data under GDPR. And it's a good enabler. It's a good tool for security, but it has other social uses. There does need to be more legislation around controlling it. There needs to be better guidelines coming out, like the likes of ICO and stuff like that, for organizations that are just, they're just using it for access to the laptops or anything like that. Personally, it's your call, and those organizations should be upfront as well, like Apple or Samsung or whoever. When you go, I'll use my thumb to get in my phone, that should be upfront and say, by the way, if you do this, this is where it's stored and stuff like that. Not hide it behind the click here for the privacy notice, which is 6,000 pages long and no one ever reads. And it reminds me of the South Park episode, but I'll go into that. But that's it from the top of me, because it's a good tool and it can do good things. I mean, I don't know if you guys have heard of the Moscow Metro. What they do, they just use facial recognition. You walk through, you sign up to it, you obviously do that, and it just uses your face, and that's your ticket. I mean, daft for ease. I hate the tube, so daft to me is great. But edit. But that's my 2 cents.
No, I like it, and I think it's a lively debate. This is probably one of the more lively debates we've had. I definitely want to get you guys on again to debate this and probably some other stuff. At the end of the day, I think it's definitely a very big subject matter. I'm actually really interested. Any of you out there listening to this, please drop some comments in. We're going to be dropping this on LinkedIn and obviously on the YouTube channel as well. So please feel free to obviously like, subscribe, and click the bell notifications so you can be told when this fantastic content is coming out. But in addition, what are your comments on it? Add a comment in, get in touch with us, whatever, and we'll revisit the subject matter. And maybe we'll pull 1 or 2 other people in. Maybe we could start a massive argument on one of the podcasts about how biometrics is used and the right and the wrong. We'll do a 2-hour one where it's like 2 groups of people just shouting and screaming at one another. If you want that kind of content, we shall provide. Fantastic. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Iain. We're definitely going to get you on again. For all of you out there, listening in or watching, if you're on the YouTube channel, it's been absolutely fantastic. Please do subscribe and let us know what you think. And we'll be back with you with all kinds of new and interesting content. And if there's anything you want us to cover, any guests you want me to bring on so you can listen to us argue, just let us know and we'll be happy to organise that for you. Speak to you all soon. Fare thee well.